Hello everyone, how are you doing? I'm doing well. I advise you to subscribe to the channel and put a like. Did you do? Great. Now I propose to peppervy it to the topic of the video we have today is not usual, namely, what's the weirdest habit you've witnessed in a friend's kitchen? Story 1. When I was like 14-15, my best friend got her license and a car. To celebrate, like 3 or 4 of us went to the grocery store and each got a can of Ready Whip. On the way home, we're speeding through the bad part of town, music bumping and just devouring our whipped cream when we're pulled over. Cop comes and takes all of our IDs and then calls us to his car one by one on the loudspeaker. He's drilling us. What are you doing with the whipped cream? I'm eating it, sir. It's really good. My friend likes the extra creamy, but it leaves a weird film in my mouth, so I just like the regular kind. It took me a lot of years to realize why we were pulled over for eating Ready Whip. Story 2. My stepmother boils pork chops in cream of mushroom soup and multiple cups of water, with a side of boiled potatoes. No salt or pepper or butter in any of it. You put the watery cream of sadness on your waterlogged potatoes. We had this once a week. Her spaghetti, homemade sauce. Multiple cans of tomato paste with 1 can of tomato sauce and a small dash of Italian seasoning. Nothing to balance the acid. No salt in the water for the noodles. If you add salt or sugar, she gets offended. I could go on. Story 3. When I was in junior high, my sister and I went home with a friend after church to have spaghetti for lunch and hang out for the afternoon. Their house was an absolutely filthy hoarder pigsty, and they had a dirty cat litter box under the kitchen table. Smelled like it hadn't been cleaned in days, maybe longer. On top of that, the house was overrun with flies, and her elderly 80-something-year-old dad spent the whole meal swatting them with a fly swatter right on the table we were eating at. It was sickening. Her mom frequently brought homemade food to church for the potlucks, and after that day, I never ate anything she cooked ever again. To this day, I won't eat someone's homemade food if I haven't been inside their house before. Story 4. My dad bought multiple 12-packs of Coke Zero when they changed the recipe a few years back. He, at the time, wasn't a fan of the new recipe and wanted a supply of the old stuff. Years went by and he never cracked into it. One day I feel something wet on the kitchen floor, so I look down and flat soda is leaking from one of the boxes. Sure enough, these cans were somehow compromised and had started to leak old soda. We surveyed the damage and found mold inside the boxes, so this had been going on for a while. I think I saw him shed some tears as he poured his beloved old recipe Coke Zero down the kitchen sink. He's since accepted the new recipe. Story 5. I stayed for a week with an old friend. While visiting, we cooked a lot. I noticed something the first day and didn't think much of it. The second day I thought something was up. The third day, he did it again and I asked if he was fucking with me because it was so odd. Nope, he knows he's got a weird ass habit. He uses 300 grit sandpaper on his cutting board after every time he uses it. Not weekly or monthly. If he uses the board, it's sanded, conditioned overnight, and oiled in the morning before he goes to work. I think he's got some OCD because he has other bizarre habits too. Story 6. Well, not me, but my sister. She would go to this woman's home to get her nails done. She did this quite often, but it was usually earlier in the day when husbands and kids were away at work and school. One day the woman switched it up and asked her to come in the evening. This woman proceeded to start on my sister's nails, and halfway through she stops and starts making dinner, and then goes back and forth from making dinner to doing my sister's nails. Not one time did she wash her hands. Literally had nail dust and acrylic dust on her hands and nail polish remover, and proceeded to chop and touch that poor family's meal. Story 7. Honestly, with the pet hair situation in some people's homes, that's a good move. I wish my mom would do that rather than find clumps of dog hair in every single thing she attempts to cook. I look at her sleeves when I visit her house and she usually has dog hair on them, just waiting to fall onto the counter. The hair winds up in her mixing bowls and cabinets everywhere, and she's not in the habit of rinsing things before cooking with them. My Salvadoran husband and his family have really opened my eyes to kitchen hygiene lol. I love animals so much, but we don't have pets for this reason mostly. One day maybe when I have a larger home where I can keep the pets out of the kitchen. And even then, I'd probably keep safe clothes that have no interaction with pet hair. Story 8. Back when I was young and waited tables, I had a regular elderly couple. I loved them dearly. They came in every week for our early bird special at a high-end steakhouse. There wasn't an early bird special. I just made it up for them. Our chef made meatloaf for them. Our restaurant never once had meatloaf on the menu. They were such a lovely couple. I celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary with them at the restaurant. They were laughing because they had a huge party for their 50th anniversary and then joked that no one cares about 60 years. I went nuts. Y'all have been married longer than I've been alive twice over. I want all the advice. Story 9. This one is not as bad as some of the ones in this thread, but I have this friend, a grown adult male who doesn't wash his dishes with soap. I realized this after I had already eaten at his house several times. We were talking in his kitchen one day, and I watched him start washing a pan. He rinsed the food off with water and just put it up to dry. Then, later on, he was at my house and yelled at me for washing a pan he had given me with soap. He was apparently scared I was going to take off the finish or something. The kicker is that I am immune deficient. I was born this way. It's not AIDS or HIV, and he knows this. Yet he doesn't clean his dishes with soap. I know everyone runs a household differently, but I feel like this should be kind of a universal standard in a first world country as long as you can afford it. Story 11. I witnessed the way my mill washes chicken before cooking it. At first I was like, yeah, totally fine. Some people do, some people don't. I thought she was going to rub it down with lemon juice and vinegar or something like normal. She literally holds raw breasts under the running sink, rubbing it around and flings it onto a cutting board. It looked like a Snil Skitwater chicken juice was flying everywhere. It was one of those times when you're watching something so outrageous, you can't control your facial expressions. I don't trust her in the kitchen at all after that. Story 12. When my childhood dog would poop inside, and if it was not solid, my dad would use a spoon to clean it up. Not a designated spoon that was the dog shit spoon, just a regular spoon from the cutlery drawer. I did not discover this until he had been doing this for years. I was horrified and furious. When I told him it was disgusting, he got so defensive and said, well, how would you like me to clean it up? I then listed many different ways to clean dog shit. My mom also didn't seem too concerned with it. I refused to use their cutlery until they no longer had any dogs and they had bought a new set. And quite frankly, I try to avoid eating there as much as possible because I have no idea what else my parents think is normal. Story 13. The way I cook. No food directly touches the counter, and if it's going to, I'm cleaning the counter first. Unless someone has a cat that just never enters the kitchen or the kitchen is cut off by a door, anyone with cats has cats on their counters, even if they're sure they don't. Clean your counters before using them and it doesn't matter. Dust, grease, bugs you don't see, etc. are also all up on people's counters with or without pets. Just don't trust something that wasn't just cleaned to be clean enough for food. Story 14. I had an acquaintance whose place I went to a couple of times for parties. On both occasions, they brought out a blender to blend wine. I think one of the times I just saw them blend a single bottle, but another time they blended 2 bottles together to a weird result. I think they fundamentally misunderstood what it meant to blend wines and thought that it involved the appliance. I was absolutely gobsmacked but didn't know them well enough to feel comfortable with asking them why they did it. Story 15. They had a stick of salted butter that they left out at room temperature on a butter plate. The butter plate had no lid. The cat would lick it regularly and they would still use it. In my own home, I have a filtered water spigot on my sink for drinking water. My cat learned that there was fresh, tasty water that could be licked from the tip. Gross. It now has a funnel threaded onto it, and the tip is a solid 2 inches up and out of reach. However, I forever don't trust water spigots in any other home with a cat, because I'm sure this is not an isolated incident. Story 16. I used to go to this one friend's house almost every day after school. This was a middle-class family who made a decent amount of money. Her parents let us have however much soda we wanted, but it was always the off-brand Coke only stored in the garage. I live in the desert, so imagine walking home in 110 degrees in the summer and cracking a 90-degree Coke. Yuck. Finally, I was like, yo, you have an ice machine in your fridge, can we please have some ice? For the longest time she'd tell me, no, my parents told me ice is too expensive. Eventually, she let me use their precious ice, but I had to drink from their red Solo cups, which the entire family reused. Once they even flipped out on their maids because they threw away the dirty Solo cups. God, that house was so fucking weird. Story 17. My ex used to let her cat on the countertops. She would let them walk and sleep on them. They were outdoor cats as well, so not massively clean. But she wouldn't either stop them doing it or wipe the counter down after. It started a massive argument between us once because she was making lunch for her 7-year-old and put the bread directly on the counter where seconds earlier A cat had walked across, sat down, and licked itself. She got really pissy with me when I said she is going to make someone really sick one day. In fact, I'm pretty sure she got upset and started to cry, to which I had to apologize like it was horrible of me to point out something that should be completely and absolutely obvious. I also lived with a mate loves his cheese. Whenever he was using it, he would cut off a slice, then just take a huge bite out of the block. I would often just watch him do this about 3 or 4 times whilst cooking with it. Absolutely perplexing. Story 18. My husband will not get this about me, so I've taken to hiding candy. I don't have a big sweet tooth, but once in a while like to indulge. I'll buy sweets candy 45x a year, kinda rareness. He, on the other hand, eats candy sweets near daily. It's such a fucking nightmare for me. When shopping, I will pick out a bag of, say, Werther's, and a week later be like, man, I would like one, and the bag will be completely gone. I get so mad, but he's like, well, you weren't eating them, so... And I'm like, no, I wasn't, because I was saving them for when I felt like having one or two. I, unlike you, don't eat an entire bag of candy the second I get it. I sorta get it, but also, dude, leave my shelf-stable candy alone, bro. Lmao. Story 19. I know someone who throws away almost nothing, which wouldn't be a terrible habit if it didn't mean offering you the moldy lemon that has been sitting on the counter for God and no long, because God forbid she just cut a new lemon. Tomatoes, peppers, anything. I try not to eat there. She is very well off and has never been poor. I don't think her parents were incredibly wealthy, but they were at least middle class. But she has this hoarder mindset, especially around food. Also, she refuses to use chef's knives and cooks exclusively with steak knives. Story 20. So I guess maybe this is why she used one. With a wide range of heat settings, typically 175 degrees to at least 400 degrees, electric skillets allow you to cook almost anything. But the best part about electric skillets is that they hold a consistent heat. Unlike traditional stovetops, which may have hot spots and uneven heat, electric skillets consistently keep the temperature you set. Not only are they great for pan frying and sautéing, that consistent heat is ideal for deep frying donuts, chicken, potatoes, and fish in the skillet. If you're new to deep frying, check out our best tips for deep frying at home. I totally forgot that my mom used to fry onions and potatoes in an electric skillet, but I didn't know why until just now. That said, they're a pain in the ass, so I don't use them. Story 21. Holy crap. My grandmother made something similar for lazy nights, except she browned extra thick pork chops in the electric skillet with chopped garlic, then added condensed tomato soup, some broth, lots of Italian herbs, then let it simmer with the lid on till the chops were near fall apart. She served it with garlic buttery mashed white potatoes, had to be the white ones, so they'd have a firm texture and not just absorb sauce, and green beans simmered with yet more garlic and bacon. I figure that the condensed soup and pork chops was a common dish at one point, but your stepmom obviously took the psychopath route. Story 22. My mill immigrated to the U.S. from smaller town China in the 80s. She and other members of her family have run successful restaurants for decades. She is a very good cook who takes authentic dishes and fusion stuff both very seriously. She will leave food out because it's so clean here. She gave us homemade banana bread in a Ziploc bag over the summer. When I got home and gleefully opened that sumbitch, at least 3 flies waved at me. I couldn't bear to interrupt their party. I just sealed it back up and chucked it in the trash. She also does weird homebrew medicine in bottles and jars under the sink sometimes. Makes me very glad there are no children of mine young enough to potentially chug that shit. Story 23. My mom in her 70s says that it was common practice when she was a kid to go to the butcher shop and be given a pinch of raw ground beef as a treat. It was like getting a lollipop or sticker at the doctor's office when I was a kid in my 40s. It's likely not a huge deal for a healthy adult to eat a pinch of ground beef. I mean, it's not raw chicken. I know most of the people my age grew up eating raw cookie dough with nothing awful happening, so I think of it as being pretty similar. Is it ideal? No. Will it kill you? Probably not. Will you have some GI distress? Maybe. Story 24. My spouse and I visited my 28-year-old brother in his bachelor pad. Not a single drawer or cupboard organizational device. Silverware sat haphazardly in the silverware drawer. One other drawer held a plastic cooking spoon and spatula for the rare occasion that he'd make himself dinner that wasn't frozen and thawed or just takeout. I don't think he had any form of culinary knives. Also no dish rags, hand towels, sponges, scrubbers, dish soap, or hand soap at the kitchen sink. Everything got stuffed in the dishwasher. Story 25. I knew a girl who had to be watched every time we entered like a Walmart or gas station because she always gravitated towards the duster. I'll never try it because of seeing her addiction. She would inhale it while driving and flipped her car so many times I have no idea how she's still alive. When she'd come to, her first instinct was to grab the duster and run. She literally has done this dozens of times. Her brain is completely fried. I guess she used to be a physics major. At least her fiancé told me that. Now she's basically a zombie. I've never held a full conversation with her. Haven't seen them in a few years. Can't imagine how she's like now. Story 26. Had a roommate who pretty much lived off of takeout food delivery. But when he did rarely cook, he would just boil the hell out of everything. Pasta was his go-to, and here's how he'd make it. He'd get the pot boiling, dump the pasta in, and would just leave it until he deemed it cooked. Never followed the cooking time recommendation. The noodles would be boiled until they were this goopy, mushy glob, and then he'd dump whatever sauce he'd boiled into oblivion on top of it. He also liked rice and had a rice cooker, but never even tried to get the ratio right. He'd eat his pot of mushy, watery rice and then complain about it not being very good. I tried to explain to him that he needed to use less water, but it never stuck. Story 27. Your mom's friend is an ass for that. I am sorry she did that to you. My mom's best friend made me eat meatballs when I was around 7, which is when I became a vegetarian. The texture is what made me quit eating meat. Mid-30s now and still a vegetarian. Turns out I have sensory processing disorder. She babysat me and wouldn't let me leave the table until I took a bite. I puked. She made me sit there in my puke until my mom came home. Apparently I wasn't eating meat because I needed punishment as I was willful. I just try not to be an asshole to kids. It's not like it's hard. Story 28. My old housemates would cut food directly onto the marble countertop of the kitchen island and leave the residue there despite the fact that we each had 2 cabinets worth of our own kitchen tools, including cutting boards. They also never washed their dishes to the point that their side of the 2-basin sink had cobwebs between their dirty pans and plates. Just imagine an inch worth of rotten avocado, lemon juice, and various herbs caked on a countertop, which they'd simply put fresh produce on top of to prep and scrape off into their plates or pans. It was horrifying. Ironically, they thought I was gross for prepping my own food on the dining room table using my cutting boards because they eat there. Story 29. I was at a family event, wife's side, and she said, "Make sure you get your plate before Uncle Brian gets in line." She said he sticks his fingers in food and licks them. I didn't witness it on this occasion, but at my nephew's first B-day, I shit you not. They put this giant cupcake in front of my nephew. The uncle was close by and he stuck his finger in the icing and licked it. His eyes met mine. Lol, my sil saw and said, "Did you just stick your finger in his cupcake?" He said no and looked at me to see if I was going to snitch or not. I have since seen him do something similar on multiple occasions. Story 30. I've lived in my house for 13 years and I still hit the wrong light switch in the living room and turn on the kitchen light instead. Spouse does too. No idea why it's so dang difficult. Also, when we first moved in, his mother, God rest her spiteful soul, took it upon herself to unpack our dishes. We both realized that the plates were in the cupboard, the glasses should be in, but it felt like an impossible task to switch them. So for 13 years, we opened the wrong cabinet almost every time. He finally swapped everything and now we open the wrong cabinet almost every time anyway. My poor brain. Story 31. Had a roommate who did this. He and the third roommate refused to use the dishwasher because we don't use that many dishes, the proof being the lack of dirty dishes after hand washing them. Problem was, the roommate who stashed everything in his room would only partially wash his dishes. Like, he would take a plate off the stack of dirty ones, semi-wash just the top of it, then plop it on the drying rack. So the front still had grease streaks, and the back would still have ketchup on it from the next plate on the stack. I used to go into his room and pile all of his dirty dishes onto his bed. So glad I only live with the much cleaner person I'm married to now. Story 32. My fiancé has a strange way of making rice. Hell eyeball roughly halfway up the pot, then eyeball some rice and pour it in. No knuckle trick, no 12 ratio, nada. Then hell leave it to cook, uncovered for maybe 910 minutes like pasta. Then he drains the rice water out and presto, perfect mushy on the outside, crispy on the inside rice. He said it's Swedish. He lived in Sweden for a bit. Apparently every single Swedish person makes their rice like this. I made rice the correct way for him. Rinsed the rice, used the 12 ratio, let it cook covered up the whole bit. When I served him the rice, his eyes got very big and now I am the only one allowed to make rice anymore. Haha. Story 33. If you're interested in drugs but not into actually taking them, or you are curious about trying something but you want to do it safely, there's a government-sponsored Dutch TV show YouTube channel about all kinds of drugs where the hosts take the drug and document exactly what the effects are. They also talk about the risks. Like with whipped cream canisters, the risk is mostly brain damage from a lack of oxygen if you take too much, or freezing your lips and throat because the compressed gas comes out freezing cold. This episode is about this laughing gas you can turn on English subtitles. Story 34. I collect mugs. They're practical yet pretty and a mostly harmless thing to accumulate. I pick them up when I travel, on special occasions, or just because. People know this and gift them to me as well. I did a cull when I moved in with my partner recently from living alone and needed to share cupboard space. But I still own more than any sane human could possibly need and plenty hardly ever get used. I've just gone and counted and am currently at 37. They're carefully stacked in pairs, each had a partner, so it matters. How someone could own 117 and have the cupboard space to store them is beyond baffling. Story 35. So years ago, my husband and I were teachers in a remote place. We had dinner with another teacher and he was making tacos. He was telling us all about these great dishes he had thrifted and how proud he was of the find. We look and all of these dishes were covered in a fine layer of dust and still had their price tags on them. He hadn't washed any of them after getting them from the thrift store. I'm all for thrift store finds, but wash them. Because you never know, bless my husband who graciously washed them all for us before we ate. Story 36. In my area, the convenience stores used to keep the Reddi-wip under lock and key. Kids wouldn't even buy or steal a can. They just take one out of the refrigerator case and inhale the nitrous right there in the aisle. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's been a couple of years since I saw a sign on a dairy case that said, "Please ask a store clerk if you wish to purchase Reddi-wip." So I'm guessing that either it was too inconvenient for clerks needing to step away from their busy register or the kids working there were using the nitrous oxide themselves. Story 37. I once worked at a place that allowed dogs, and sometimes we'd have rich entitled people come in with their purebred dogs and act like we had never seen purebred dogs before. One such woman came in and tried to foist her dog's period pad on me to throw away. She was waving it like the flag of Japan and demanding I dispose of it. I directed her to the restroom. Then she said something like, "Get your dog so he doesn't rape my dog." My dog, also purebred but neutered, had no history of sexual assault. Well, and that's all we have. I hope you liked the theme of this video. I ask you to support the channel with a like, subscribe, and kalakolchikam. Well, and leave your comments. I will be glad to read them.